Hi everybody, and welcome to a discussion. I've completely kludged together a tripod. It's just two wicker baskets. My tripod is also buried somewhere in storage. It's how it goes. But I just had to make a video. I had to talk about this because I'm just really impressed with what's happening here with this certain company, and I just had to make this video. So the brand we're going to be talking about today is Matthews Atlas. They have just released this, their fourth actual catalog that is not just a little binder spec sheet thing that all the dealers got. And they've completely changed the format, they've changed a bunch of things, and they're continuing to expand on their line. And I believe I've done a video on them before, but I want to just sort of circle back and talk about what I've already been noticing happening just since I did that video. And then also, at the end, I'm just going to sort of stitch on a clip at the end. Well, I say a clip, I'm just going to be going through some of the changes in the catalog and just sort of what I like. It is available digitally, so if you want to look at the whole thing and download it and print it, there is a very easy way to do it. You just have to go to their website, and I'm sure that's somewhere on here. I don't know where. Whatever. If you just look up the Matthews Fan Company, you'll be able to find their website online and then take a look at that. So anyways, whenever I did that last video on these guys, I was basically talking about how for a while, Matthews Atlas was, you know what, here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to sum that all up for you here instead. I think that's a much better way of doing it rather than just sort of talking about what I said in the video, just sort of in the, I don't know, just looking back. I'm just basically just going to retell everything I did. I think that's going to make a lot more sense if I do it. So basically, Matthews started in the early 90s. The founder, Chuck Matthews, was in Brazil, and he saw some of the original Gerbar fans, and eventually he got linked up with the company. And this is a really long story short. There is actually a whole history page in the catalog now right at the front, so you can read about the whole history. So that will be something you can look at on the digital catalog if you want. But anyways, then by the mid 90s, there were Duplo Dynamico fans around, and it was Matthews Gerbar here in the USA. And even for a little while, they sold products to Quorum International, and they called it the Commotion. It was a Duplo Dynamico in either brass or white, and yeah, Quorum sold those for a little while, as well as Matthews. And then after a while, Quorum stopped selling them because obviously Matthews wanted to go a little bit further. Also because they had introduced some new designs in 2000, I think is when they introduced the Brisa 2000. And then they also had one of their directional fans. And throughout the 2000s, they continued to expand this line. And then sometime, I want to say in the late 2000s, early 2010s, was around when they founded the Atlas side of things. And instead of being handmade, sort of more specialty and niche fans, these were a little bit more standard. Of course, the designs weren't standard. They were outstanding. Every single one of them was a piece of modern art, and they just looked absolutely fantastic. Some of them are still even in the catalog today because of how good they did. And now, one of my biggest, I had a couple complaints, around this sort of time period when things were getting going. First of all, that all they had was just a binder catalog thing. It wasn't really all that good for actually selling out of. And this was a time when paper was still very much a bigger deal. Not every showroom had a big old computer and TV screen that you could use to just pull up and look at all the products. And some of my other nitpickings were early on the Atlas line. It was a lot of repetition. I noticed a lot of very, very similar designs. And just recently, they've started to break that. They've started to break that chain, and now alongside, a lot of the very similarly styled products, they're starting to go above and beyond. They're doing some extra, sort of different designs. That's not just the same old, cylinder with a unique style of blades. Whether it's one shape of carved wood, another shape, or ABS or something like that. Because that's what they had for a while. They had fans like the Irene and the Eliza. And then eventually they had fans like the Patricia, and then let's see, there's some more here. I'll just pull up the catalog, and Basically, I'll just mention them all. Let's see what else was there here. Oh yeah, then eventually they introduced the Molly and the Mollywood, and then the non-fans, and basically all of them looked very, very similar. And like I said, they all just sort of followed a similar, cylinder design. Some of them had a light, maybe they didn't, and they just had, different blades on them. And that was about it. And while it's super cool to have all that variation because you can fine tune your design much better, that was basically all they had besides their really niche Matthews Gerbar fans. And a lot of the showrooms I talked to around that time told me that they didn't really do a whole lot with the brand, mostly just because of that. They're just, I don't know, it just didn't really seem all that, what am I trying to say? It just wasn't as accessible and appealing, I guess, versus a lot of the other brands. And I don't know, maybe Matthews and slash Atlas, maybe they knew about that. Maybe that's why they start to branch out. Or maybe this was just something that they had planned all along. I really don't know. All I know is that after a while, they did start to expand the designs. There were definitely some standouts and some really unique things that they had throughout the line. But for a while, I was noticing it really get dominated by what I was talking about earlier with the cylinder 3 blades. But then recently, I've started to notice them make a lot of changes and introduce some new products in, like the Ariella, and also the Alessandra was a great addition. And then there were numerous other designs as well. I can't think of them all off the top of my head right now. But they really did start to expand a little bit more, and it really does seem like they're showing no signs of slowing down on that front. They're just continuing to expand. Now some of the other nitpicks I've had, the remotes were kind of, I guess sort of basic. And, also like I mentioned, it just didn't really seem as accessible, and appealing as other lines would have. However, that's sometimes the deal with a niche company when they're first trying to get into a point where they're starting to market towards a broad horizon of people versus just a very niche market. It can definitely take some time. And, this was never to say that the products were bad or that they were doing anything wrong, because in reality, the products were always solid. They were always good. They just didn't really have as much recognition for some of that stuff as they do now. And this is something to just keep on watching. I have a feeling every year things are just going to get better and better, and there's going to be some really exciting stuff coming. That's just the feeling I've got. And I'm sure a lot of the people who are a little bit more familiar and probably even know some of the people working with the company, they probably know and can confirm in their minds. I'm sure we're not just going to get a bunch of, spoilers on what they're planning on in the future, but all I know is that that's probably what's going to happen. I mean, at this point, they've got a lot of momentum going, and I really do think that it is just going to continue. And now, we're at the point where a lot more people are starting to recognize this brand, and I'm seeing so many more showrooms displaying a lot of the products. I've always seen, one or two at most of the showrooms that carry them, but now I'm seeing many more because there's tons more unique designs. And that's another thing, the more displays you have up, the more likely someone's going to be walking around the store and say they like it, Obviously, there's tons of different ways to shop. However, usually when somebody comes into a showroom, before anybody helps them, unless they get greeted instantly, they're just sort of wandering around and looking. And if there's more presence around the showroom, there's a higher chance that they're going to find something they like, with a bigger variety. But the problem was that the Atlas hits back then were mostly just fans like the Eliza and the Irene, and there were so many different similar versions, you'd usually only see a couple, and that basically just sort of left the rest of the line just sort of, I guess, sort of just fading away in the catalog almost. However, now, they've worked on, they've ironed out some kinks, and some things that just weren't really working or selling. And now we're at a point where I feel like what they have in the line is really solid, and they're going to keep on expanding with it. This is definitely, like I said, a must-watch brand. It is definitely only going to get better from here. And that's really all I have to say on that sort of front about how they expanded and how they got to where they are. And now I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and end this little segment here. And then we're going to go ahead and I'm just going to sort of flip through the catalog, talk about a couple things, and then we will probably wrap it up from there. So I will see you in just a sec, and we'll take a look at that catalog. Here we are with the catalog. And as you can see, the cover is relatively similar. They've kept the dandelion blowing in the breeze. That's been a thing for the longest of times. And every year they just seem to keep on improving the cover. And this year we've actually got a fan on it. I believe that is the Non model. And as you can see, this is volume 4 of the product's catalog. The very first catalog released all the way back in 2019. And for the first 3, they kept the same layout, and while I did kind of like it, I liked how there were all the specs. It just wasn't necessarily laid out exactly the best, at least in terms of looks, but they've definitely improved on that now, so we'll go ahead and take a look. So like I mentioned here at the start, we do have all history, and if you can't read any of it here, this is available on their website, like I mentioned before. And then, as you can see, they've just updated everything. Everything is completely different. Also, the book is way thicker now. It's like 140 pages. So another thing that they've done is they've got a visual index, but they've sort of separated it out based off of different products. So I really do like the way that they did that as well. So yeah, they're just continuing to update. And there is a storm outside, so if you hear any thunder in the background, obviously I can't really control the weather. But yeah, here is the little Atlas opening page. And it was 2008 when they first started Atlas. I knew it was sometime around then. And then from here, this is sort of what the catalog layout looks like. They still feature just as many specs. But now this page here, this sort of, they've got a nice little description of the product. They have an install shot and then just sort of a close-up of the product. I really like that. I really like how they've got everything set up here. It's really nice. It looks a lot better than the previous layout, while at the same time still maintaining all the important information that they need. Now, the other thing that they did was for the customizable products, they did a layout like this, where you've got the, sort of the opening sort of description there and a big blow-up. And then you've got the install shot, and then you come here, you've got all your specs and finishes, and then you've just got a page here with tons of different combinations. I also love that back here they mentioned how many different variations there are. I really like that touch. And then you will just see that continue throughout the whole catalog. This is one of the newer products, by the way, the Alessandro Tropical, and I absolutely adore it. Seriously incredible. And then also the other new one I was mentioning was the Ariella. There it is. Once again, absolutely love this fan, and it's a sign that there's only good things to come from this brand. And then as you can see, the rest of the catalog follows a similar layout. And the layout, like I said, depends on whether it's a custom product or not. I really do quite like the way that they did this and how everything is set up. And now here is the little Matthews Gerber page. And then every page here looks just like this. Pretty similar to the other layout. And another thing that's new this year is they've actually got some accessory pages, which I like. We've got stuff on controls here. And then they've got down rods and mounting hardware. There's more mounting hardware here for sloped ceiling mounts. And then we have swatches for the finishes. They did do a little swatch booklet a while ago. I've got it somewhere buried in my storage unit. I do like how they've got this here now. Hopefully they'll do another set of swatches someday in an actual booklet where you can see them better. And then here you've got the Gerber finishes. And then, as you can see, they actually can do any custom color. Now, I remember back in the day when the custom colors, they weren't actually all featured on the catalog page. You just had, the brasses and the coppers and stuff. But all the rainbow stuff was just on one page in the back of the catalog. It was actually a binder at that time, but I remember that, so I really love how they've done it. And then here we've got, quick reference pages just with certain specs and other things. And then here we've just got some basically just important information. And then, you just sort of got a blank page, and you got the back cover with a QR code that brings you to the digital catalog. I have no idea whether you can actually scan that through the video. And then here's what the side looks like. But yeah, I really do love this catalog. I was so excited when I first saw this on their website. I was just blown away. I was just flipping through it and through it again like a million times for a couple hours the day I saw this, because I was just studying it and just enjoying how well it was laid out, and of course all the terrific products in here. So now that I've sort of shown you the catalog and mentioned the few things that I wanted to, I'm going to go ahead and send you back to me sitting at my desk for the outro. Well, there you have it, folks. We have just taken a look at the catalog, and that is going to be where I wrap up this video. I sure hope you guys enjoyed it, especially since I haven't really done a discussion in a long time. It's honestly a miracle I could even figure out something to do with this. However, I was just so thrilled, you know, by everything that Matthews Atlas was doing. I just had to do another video on it. Like I said, I've done one in the past, and that's somewhere. If you just search Matthews on my YouTube channel, you know how you can search videos. I'm sure you'll be able to find it somewhere. Or maybe I'm just remembering an outtake or something that never made it to YouTube, in which case this would be the only video I've done. I really have no idea. But anyways, I sure hope you guys did enjoy this video, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.